We've held multiple advisory boards with leading rheumatologists in the AxSpA field, the US, Canada, UK, and across the EU. There's no question that there's an urgent need in this disease. The rheumatologist will tell you that 10 years for a diagnosis and sometimes 10 years for a referral from primary care is way too long. If you think about living with chronic pain, it impacts every part of your life. Unfortunately, many of these patients will end up on opioids too. And with the focus on how can we all help reduce the impact of the opioid crisis, if we can actually treat the disease, and in our case, AxSpA, and alleviate the chronic pain through the proper mechanisms, we can do our part to help with the opioid crisis as well.
Welcome, MedTech Gurus. Today, as I mentioned in the introduction, we're joined by an innovative leader, Neil Klompas, Chief Executive Officer at Augurex Life Sciences. Neil brings more than 2 decades of experience in leading medtech companies at the intersection of diagnostics, rheumatology, and translational medicine. Under his leadership, Augurex has emerged as a pioneer in autoimmune biomarker discovery, developing blood tests that bring clarity to conditions that have long been difficult to diagnose. One of Augurex's most promising breakthroughs is SpineStat, the world's first blood test designed to help identify axial spondyloarthritis, sometimes known as AxSpA, a chronic inflammatory disease of the spine that affects an estimated 4.7 million Americans, but often goes undiagnosed for nearly a decade. By measuring a unique autoantibody, anti-14-3-3 ADA, and combining it with CRP, SpineStat can help identify up to 90% of AxSpA patients earlier, giving physicians a chance to start treatment before irreversible spine damage occurs. SpineStat is already approved in Canada and the UK, with FDA submissions planned, and Augurex will be presenting new clinical data at the ACR Convergence 2025. Beyond the test itself, Neil's work represents a larger shift, moving from symptom-based to biologically informed medicine that improves outcomes and reduces dependence on opioids for pain management. Hey, Neil, are you ready to be our guru today?
Totally ready, Tom. Let's do this.
We're excited to have you. So tell us something fun or interesting about yourself or your family so we can get to know you better.
Oh, geez. Somewhat roundabout entrance into biotech and med devices. I started as a medic with the Army and then later as a paramedic in the real world until a bunch of physicians took me aside and convinced me to go back to college. And really glad they did. It started me on a path which has been incredibly rewarding.
Yeah, that's fantastic. I would think, first of all, that experience probably helped give you a really deep background in understanding as you started into that career path, right?
Yeah, even sitting, whether it's in the CFO's office or in the CEO's office, being grounded in frontline patient-facing care gives you a different perspective in this industry. I know a lot of my colleagues are physicians that had the same experience, but it's really irreplaceable when it comes to understanding the patient experience, the patient journey, and then communicating that to your team and to investors. The real importance of keeping patients first.
Yeah, I love that. That just is so helpful for that whole cohort that you just mentioned. So Neil, you really, as I mentioned in the introduction, you spent your career building companies around breakthrough med tech, technologies. I'm just kind of curious, what originally drew you now to this intersection of immunology, innovation, and business. Can you give us some insights into how you ended up here?
Oh, great question, Tom. So I've spent a lot of my career in oncology, and there's still massive unmet medical need in oncology. But after stepping away from my last company, which subsequently had an FDA approval for a new second-line oncology therapeutic, now branded as Ziihera, it was really a chance to reflect on where are those areas of unmet medical need and where could I make a real difference? And kind of reflecting on that universal truth that if physicians can't diagnose a disease or a condition, they can't treat it. So we're really where that patient journey begins with the identification of what's going on. And I think the second eye-opener was the fact that within the field of autoimmunity and rheumatology, the use of biomarkers and personalized medicine is kind of where oncology was 10 to 15 years ago. A lot of the first line therapeutics, the disease modifying rheumatic agents or DMARDs, they're used to treat rheumatoid arthritis and other autoimmune diseases, are really broad autoimmune suppressants. The whole class of TNF alpha inhibitors, like your Humiras out there, or the IL-17 inhibitors, they really just tamp down the entire immune system. I think where we're about to witness is the same revolution that we saw in oncology 10 to 15 years ago, where now we let our understanding of specific biomarkers guide the use of therapies, whether it's first or second line therapy, or an exciting new class of therapies which are emerging in the autoimmune space. Those two factors, really the understanding of this super high unmet medical need and where rheumatology was poised to take this next leap forward, really got me excited about the intersection of immunology and innovation.
Yeah, I love that. Thanks for the explanation. So I'm just kind of curious. Was the biomarker the concept? Was it kind of a stepping stone to rheumatology? We had to learn the biomarkers for oncology, and then that helped us to the next step to rheumatology, or was it just a parallel path that just took a little longer?
I think the really interesting thing is that autoimmune diseases are mosaics. There's a lot of things going on in autoimmunity within the body, not just one pathway, sometimes multiple pathways, and sometimes not the same inflammatory pathways that we see in the gut versus, say, peripheral joints versus the spine, which we're looking at with AxSpA. The biomarkers that we've used in, say, rheumatoid arthritis have been well characterized, well understood over the last 20 years. We started this journey at Augurex using 1433-eta as a biomarker in rheumatoid arthritis. And it adds more understanding to the diagnosis of what's called seronegative rheumatoid arthritis, or disease that doesn't have rheumatoid factor, which can be upwards of 20% of all RA cases, but also greater utility in prognostic monitoring of the disease and then long-term monitoring of patients on therapy. We asked the question outside RA, which has had decades of work on biomarkers, where else is our novel biomarker really pronounced? So we did, I think, what any good scientifically focused organization does. You start running panels of diseases and look at different variations of what you're looking at. And you get those aha moments. You get those bands on the gel that really make you go, hang on, this biomarker, or in our case, a different way of sensing that biomarker, not looking for the protein itself, but looking for the body's immune response to that, popped up in AxSpA, which really made it exciting because unlike the 20 years of research in RA and a host of biomarkers, there's virtually nothing in AxSpA. And the reality is it's a disease that is more than twice as prevalent, but often goes undetected in the general population.
Yeah, that's interesting, right? It kind of leads me into the next question, and thank you for that explanation. Because as I did research, and I think it's pretty obvious to all of us that back pain is one of the most common complaints in medicine, right? Yet AxSpA often goes undiagnosed, as you mentioned, for like 7 to 10 years. So why is it that this disease is so difficult to recognize early?
I think there's multiple factors at play, Tom, and some of it's unfortunate. The AxSpA field has not had that decades of research into biomarkers, so that's something we can do about it. Back pain is so prevalent that a lot of people also write it off, and I can speak from my own experience. The first thing when you develop back pain that persists for more than 3 months is you maybe think to yourself, it's time to stretch a bit more and lose a bit of weight. Or, geez, I guess I've turned 50. This is just another one of those things I have to live with. Or, I spent a lot of time in my work chair. Maybe I should get a new chair or a standing desk. We tend to write off back pain as just one of those things. But unfortunately, all those kind of positive steps that we can take as when we're the patient, stretching more, going to physical therapy or massage or chiropractic, getting more active, while they can help, the reality of AxSpA is that it's an autoimmune condition. And while everything helps, losing a few pounds and stretching and being more active, the reality is you have to treat the underlying disease to really halt the progression. So as a result, the diagnostic delay, the time from onset of chronic back pain to when people actually get a diagnosis from a rheumatologist, on average is between 7 to 10 years, during which time there is irreversible damage being done to the spine. And that's a real shame, something which we're really focused on ending.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's really helpful. And I love the mission you're on. And as I did my research, it seemed like there's some limitations to some of the current biomarkers that are being used. So why was this new approach so urgently needed? Can you add some little substance to the story there?
Yeah, great. So to veer into the science, as you said, there's a couple of biomarkers out there, and we really think we can move the field forward. And we feel that 14,338, including or the autoantibodies, the anti-14,338, really moves the field forward. We presented first-in-class data at the recent American College of Rheumatology's ACR Convergence Conference last week. And it was really the first time anybody has been able to show that a specific biomarker differentiates autoimmune and inflammatory related back pain from mechanical back pain. So, we're always going to ground ourselves in the data. I think that's really important for us. The other biomarkers that are out there are good biomarkers, but they tend to be general or have a few shortcomings. Not to say that they aren't great tools, but we feel we can do better. CRP, which is used, short for C-reactive protein, is a general inflammatory biomarker. It's present in rheumatoid arthritis, it's present in AxSpA, but it's also present if you have an infection. It's also present if you've had a cardiac event. And there's been some papers that show that with strenuous exercise, CRP levels can be elevated. So it's good, but it doesn't give us the precision that we need for a true diagnostic biomarker that helps clinicians rule other things out. But heck, it's been better than nothing so far. The other biomarker that's used is a genetic biomarker that shows likelihood that this is related to AxSpA. And that's a genetic marker called HLA-B27. The problem with B27 is that it is not consistently expressed in different patient populations around the world. People in Asia and Japan still get AxSpA, but the prevalence of HLA-B27 is far lower in those populations. Same within South Africa. And in North America, indigenous populations, it can be much higher. So you're fighting against this. Is a negative test for B27 truly indicative of not having AxSpA, or does it help guide? But as is the case as any field moves forward, you start with the tools you have at hand. And our job in the medtech industry and the biotech industry is to find new, innovative, and better ways of doing it. We really feel that 14,338 will build on HLA-B27 and CRP and really take a quantum step forward in identifying these patients and more so, helping raise awareness and identifying these patients early.
Yeah, thanks for that. That's helpful. And you mentioned the word precision, right? And with the anti-1433 ADA, right, with your AxSpA and your SpineStat test, I'm wondering if you can just take us a little deeper here and walk us through how this test works and why it's so different from what the other methods.
Great. So this is a bit of science. From how it works. Well, for the patient, it's not going to be any different than getting your cholesterol checked at your local lab with your regular health checkups. Another box will be ticked on the lab requisition, hopefully on your regular checkup, and part of the blood that's drawn will just be used in a different test. And that's not usually done when a patient presents with back pain. Our hope is that this can be brought in early when patients present with back pain, and we can talk about why that's really important. Mechanistically, 1433 eta itself is an intracellular chaperone protein. It's just one of those myriad of proteins inside the cell that moves things from one part of the cell to another. And in a healthy cell, that's where it's going to be. But when you have inflammatory joint damage from autoimmune conditions, and this is what we found in rheumatoid arthritis, implicated with various autoimmune pathways like JAK-STAT and others, you now get the release of 1433 eta through exosomes. And this is what makes a really good biomarker. When you suddenly find something in the bloodstream that is only there with specific medical conditions, you can use that to diagnose those conditions. And more so, unlike CRP, it's not elevated with cardiac events and it's not elevated with exercise. Interestingly, I mentioned the term seronegative earlier. It's really easy to lump all the autoimmune diseases together, lupus, Sjogren's, psoriatic arthritis. And in many ways, from a 10,000 foot level, they do share similarities. It is the body's own immune system attacking itself in various places, whether it's the skin in psoriatic or the joints with rheumatoid arthritis. But most of them are just different enough that you can't use the same tools to diagnose them. And this has been one of the challenges. It's similar. AxSpA is similar enough to RA that, we can kind of see the similarities. But two of the big biomarkers that we've used, for decades in RA just aren't present in AxSpA, and that's rheumatoid factor and ANA. Mm-hmm. So again, when we see this real opportunity to move the field forward, we were lucky to find a biomarker that is implicated in RA, and then a version of that biomarker, the autoantibodies against the protein, that are present in AxSpA. And again, it really comes down to we found something which is released into the bloodstream, which isn't there in healthy patients, but is in a specific disease. And we can use that to help guide diagnosis and hopefully prognosis.
Yeah, that's helpful, and thank you. I know you kind of dove into the science, but it kind of helped bring it together because it really is then that mosaic, right? As if you're a clinician, you can kind of pull that data, right? And maybe now have one more tool to help fill in that extra puzzle piece. Am I heading down the right path there?
Definitely, definitely. And the thing about AxSpA is that it progresses from disease which you can not see with X-ray and MRI to, in the more severe cases, disease that is evident on X-ray and MRI. So again, if, radiography, films, MRI are going to be incredibly important tools to clinicians later in the disease progression. But if we can find something that helps catch it before that permanent damage has happened, then we're making a real impact on this disease.
Yeah, fantastic. And we touched on, SpineStat is already approved in Canada and in the UK. With that, what feedback have you received from clinicians? Do you have anything you can share with us at this point?
Yeah, definitely. So we've held multiple advisory boards with leading rheumatologists in the AxSpA field from the US, Canada, UK, and across the EU. And there's no question that there's an urgent need in this disease. The rheumatologist will tell you that 10 years for a diagnosis and sometimes 10 years for a referral from primary care is way too long. If you think about living with chronic pain, it impacts every part of your life. And unfortunately, many of these patients will end up on opioids too. And with the focus on how can we all, help reduce the impact of the opioid crisis, if we can actually treat the disease, and in our case, AxSpA, and alleviate the chronic pain through the proper mechanisms, we can do our part to help with the opioid crisis as well. What we've been told by the clinicians as well is that this isn't just a need in the US, this is a need everywhere. So we really hope to be able to continue to be launching SpineStat everywhere. And in fact, just last week, we heard from the US FDA and were granted Breakthrough Device Designation, BDD, which recognizes the significant unmet need. And based on the comprehensive review of all the data that we've put together, really that we've got a shot of bringing this to market. So we're excited and really happy that FDA spent the time, gave us really valuable feedback along the way, and recognized the unmet need and our potential to really make a difference here.
Yeah, well, first of all, congratulations for that, right? Getting that designation. But I'm also, for me, it seems like, chronic pain is such just a terrible situation, right? I've had some experience with some technology in my career with that. But what you're talking about seems to me like almost the difference between regular TV and high definition TV, right? For if you're a practicing clinician, you've only had part of the story there. And it seems to me that you're bringing this whole new element that wasn't there to help speed along the proper diagnosis. Am I heading down the right path with that?
Definitely, Tom. Rheumatologists, this is what they do. They look at autoimmune diseases. So, odds are rheumatologists are going to figure this out. They're going to look at how the signs and symptoms present. They're going to, historically use CRP and HLA-B27. They're going to take the x-rays and MRIs. They're going to understand other factors and how long it's persisted. But the real challenge is the folks that are cycling between, say, chiro and physio and weight loss and yoga. We need to get to those patients. A recent paper out of Yale said that over half of the primary care physicians and family physicians don't even consider autoimmune drivers when patients present at their clinics or offices with back pain. It's over half. 2/3 of those that do recognize it will order two of the tests that I mentioned actually don't detect it, both rheumatoid factor and ANA. So when you start to dig into the data, and we talked about awareness of this disease earlier, it's really, going to be a 1-2 punch, I think. Bring a novel and innovative biomarker-driven diagnostic to market that, has a high degree of specificity and selectivity for this disease. And then it's really getting the word out that, hey, if you've got back pain, and I think you mentioned in your lead-in, chronic back pain impacts, conservatively 28% of the adult US population. I think it may be higher, but I'll go with the data as in the literature. But that alone is over 72 million Americans that are living with back pain for more than 3 months. The prevalence of this disease is 1.4% of the population, conservatively. That's 4.7 million Americans that have AxSpA and probably don't know it. And to put that in perspective, if we compare that to a disease that everybody's heard of, like rheumatoid arthritis, the prevalence of RA is only 0.6% of the population. AxSpA is more than twice as prevalent, yet we're not talking about it. We hope to change that discussion because new data out of the UK is showing that 10 to 14% of all patients with back pain have AxSpA. That's more than 1 in 10 does have a treatment that they shouldn't be living for, 7 to 10 years dealing with the symptoms.
Wow, that's phenomenal. And you mentioned your FDA Breakthrough Designation, and I think which is phenomenal. Neil, a lot of our listeners are entrepreneurs or soon-to-be entrepreneurs. So I'm wondering if you could share what were some of the biggest lessons you learned navigating this whole global regulatory pathway. Do you have any suggestions or best practices for our listeners out there?
Yeah, definitely. Listen, regulatory pathways can be daunting. They're all different and they need to link up with the markets where you can both launch your product and then be profitable with that product as well. Of course, we want this to be in every jurisdiction and available to every patient with back pain around the world so they can get these kind of answers. But the reality is you need, as any entrepreneur will tell you, you need to be really careful with your balance sheet and that cash that you have on hand and pick and choose. Without question, understanding how you enter the US market is critical. And again, there are multiple paths to do that. There's both the FDA path through either the 510K, as your listeners are well aware, or in our case, de novo pathway for a new diagnostic. But there's also the non-FDA path that's available in the US, what's known as the LDT path or the laboratory developed path, where you can access the market. And our first product, while available in other jurisdictions outside the US as an approved product, did take that LDT path in the US. What I would also tell other entrepreneurs is engage early with FDA and listen to their feedback. They see a lot of technologies and they're sometimes going to push back, and listen to that pushback, take it to heart. In fact, some of the earliest advice FDA gave us was in selecting our control population for some of these early studies. It's really tempting to pick healthy patients as your control population. And in fact, in many diseases, that is the right population. But what I think has really hampered research in AxSpA is, and this was FDA feedback, an effective and meaningful diagnostic in AxSpA needs to differentiate between mechanical back pain. So I twisted, I picked a box up wrong. I lift something up that I shouldn't have lifted. Mechanical back pain, which, PT and massage and stretching can help, versus inflammatory back pain. And we were really lucky to be able to work with some of the world's leading rheumatologists that have kept serum and blood samples from patients over the years. And not only do one clinical study, but two concurrent clinical studies that allowed us to show that we can differentiate between mechanical back pain and inflammatory back pain. And again, at the ACR conference, the American College of Rheumatology, just last week, we presented both of these data sets, including in a prestigious oral presentation, because again, the world just hadn't seen this. And this was early feedback from FDA. So engage early, listen to what they have to say, and come back with the answers they've asked for.
Yeah, that's a great story, right? Because I wouldn't have guessed that either, right? But they really kind of almost narrowed you in from the onset as to where to really find that, if you will, that low-hanging fruit that's going to get your differentiator, right?
Exactly.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that. And Neil, kind of building on this as well, you've led Augurex through years of research and clinical validation and commercial preparation, which is no easy task. But I'm curious, it maybe can help our gurus with what are the keys to keeping a team motivated and aligned through such a long cycle like this? Do you have any insights for us?
So like many of the people in our industry, many of my peers, we all stand on the shoulders of giants. I took over Augurex after it was been led by many years from the founder. So I couldn't do what I'm doing now without my predecessor, Norma Billen, the co-founder of Augurex. My focus, and it comes back to something we talked about at the start of the show, was bring everything back to the patient. I think if you can link what we're doing to the patients and talk about the patients every day and kind of bring everything back, people get it. They get the long hours, they get the occasional weekends, and they get that setbacks are part of it. Whether it's my experience actually delivering frontline medical care or just the understanding that we all know somebody that's living with either an autoimmune disease or back pain, we can make this relatable.
Yeah, that's so true, right? I love that, keeping that patient focus, which kind of keeps everybody moving towards that North Star, right?
Definitely. I think it's important as well along the way. And again, it's not rocket science. Many of the other gurus out there and many of the other entrepreneurs in the space recognize the importance of celebrating the little wins along the way. Each piece of positive data, especially in a small company, can really be transformative. So make sure that even your business folks are celebrating those wins in the lab. Make sure the folks in the lab are aware and celebrating the business wins as well. Because there's a lot of times when the data is not going to be perfect or that meeting is not going to pan out the way you want it. You got to counter those with all the positive momentum you can muster.
Yeah, thank you. And funding is also another big key to this, right? Funding and partnerships, especially in your space for diagnostic innovation. What advice would you have for our founders and entrepreneurs out there trying to build credibility and attract investment in early stage medtech?
So that's a really tricky question, and there's no question that we've had a challenging financing environment over the last few years. And in all the chats with the bankers and investors recently, I think we are on the cusp of a near-term turnaround in that financing environment. So fingers crossed that that's actually where we're at. But what I would say is, focus on staying as lean as you can until you've hit market. Luckily, we're able to use the fact that JointStat, our RA test, is already commercially available. It's offered through Quest and LabCorp and AirUP, and we have several more announcements kind of in the hopper ready to go over the next couple of months. So we hit that commercial feasibility and market acceptance of our lead product. And we use some pretty innovative mechanisms to do that. We use virtual supply chains as much as we can. We've eliminated a lot of the bricks and mortar by partnering with larger organizations. Again, it's almost cliche to say it, but creativity in those early years, you can't run this the same way as a $2 billion market cap organization. The way that those guys are running their businesses and just can't be the way we do it. I met with another diagnostic entrepreneur, and what she's been able to do from a cost of goods perspective, just fantastic. So, and the creativity that was evident in the path she had taken, is like right on. That's exactly what we all need to be doing.
And that definitely brings credibility to the investors if they see that creativity in some of those areas that you're trying to build on, right?
Definitely. And you highlighted something else great there is, frequent communication and transparency with your shareholders. This is a long journey. And again, it's never going to be a straight path and it's never going to be, always up. There's going to be a half step back every once in a while, maybe even a full step. And if you're transparent with your shareholders and you communicate with them on a regular basis, you field the calls, even from those early friends and family that maybe just put a few bucks in. When it comes to the AGMs or that comes to that next round of financing, they're going to be there for you. But you got to bring them with you on the journey. And again, share those wins, and answer the questions as much as you feel it could be pulling you away from the big picture strategic things that take up our time a lot of the time.
Yeah, I love that. So, Neil, this seems like a really exciting time for you and your team at Augurex. What does the future hold? Where are you headed from here?
Yeah, great question, Tom. Right now, we're laser focused on a broad international commercial launch of SpineStat next year. Working with some of our existing partners, but also expanding into new markets. If the cross-border turmoils of the last 12 months have shown us anything, that it's parallel markets, trying to do as much as you can to make sure that your supply chains and your commercial pipelines aren't reliant on a single point of failure. Engineering 101, identify those single points of failure and put plans in place to address them, right? We're really excited about SpineStat and the impact that we're going to have on the back pain community. And that's not to say that our R&D pipeline isn't chock full of great ideas as well. A new high sensitivity version of SpineStat called Rheumastat, which incorporates some of the modifications that we've seen in SpineStat, but applicable to rheumatoid arthritis as well. And as patient care and diagnostic care moves ever closer to patients and patients take more control of their own healthcare journeys, whether it's with AI or other tools, I think the world got used to using diagnostic tools at home. If we think back to the COVID era, where everybody was doing what are technically lateral flow tests, lying on a strip. If we can get SpineStat working, and we do have prototypes on patient and consumer-facing tests where you don't even need to go to the doctor, where you can take a finger prick, and it's 5 to 10 nanoliters of blood. It's almost imperceptible, but use that to identify whether you have an autoimmune indicator. You can go to a patient can go to their doctor with that first evidence saying, hey, I did this kit called Spine Test. Fingers crossed, the business trajectory continues to move in this positive direction that we've got. But if we can get even closer to the patient, as patients take more control of their own health, we can move even further upstream. So there's a lot in the hopper, but right now, laser focus on the broader commercial launch of SpineStat, helping everybody with back pain out there get some answers so they can move forward with the proper medical interventions.
Oh, I love it. I love the passion and the patient focus. So, Neil, first of all, I'd like to just thank and acknowledge you for all the great insights that you brought to us today. If somebody wants to learn more about SpineStat or Augurex, how do we do that? How do we connect with you? Are you on LinkedIn? Is there a website? How do we learn more?
Thanks, Tom. We definitely have a website, augurex.com. And on the news and contact section, there is a form where you can fill out your interest and get it over to us, and also get on our mailing list. We're very active on LinkedIn as well. We released the oral presentations that we gave at the ACR conference recently. We celebrate when other rheumatology and medical news outlets and podcasts like yourself feature us. So we're very active on LinkedIn. And I'm on LinkedIn as well. You can search for Neil Klompas. I think I'm the only one.
That sounds good. So once again, Neil, thank you so much. It was really a pleasure.
My pleasure. Thank you, Tom.
Thank you. Thank you for listening to MedTech Gurus. I am Sylvester Harris, your MC. If you want to learn more about Tom and his consulting services, you can go to www.pctmedical.com or email Tom at tom@pctmedical.com. Now, I can be reached at Sylvester Harris, that's SylvesterHarris 5048@gmail.com, and I'd be pleased to discuss any voiceover work that you may want for your company or broadcast. Hey, thanks so much for listening, and catch us on the next episode of MedTech Gurus.